Hey friends, welcome back to the channel with another issues-focused video. Today we are looking at Vox's why so many COVID-19 variants are showing up nowadays. And I haven't even really talked about COVID much on my channel. I've done it a couple times in detail in conjunction with last week tonight videos that I do for Patreon. That's John Oliver, but that's about it. But here we are. Vox has done some good journalism, and I also needed just some shorter videos to react to because editing is extra difficult since the pandemic started. But yeah, COVID has obviously been a huge part of our lives for what feels like ages now. And while many countries still don't have access to the vaccine, I am lucky to live in the United States. We who live here are very lucky that pretty much anyone who wants to get a vaccine can get one. And yet we have large swaths of people refusing to get vaccinated. And we have governors opening up states way too early. So I wanted to take a look at this video. We can learn more about these variants together, hopefully influence some stragglers to get vaccinated if they understand the issue better. I actually kind of doubt that. A more attainable goal is probably helping people who believe in the science to understand the issue better, and maybe they can explain it to their friends and family who will trust them more than they trust some guy on the internet. Anyway, let's get into it.
On November 5th, 2020, the United Kingdom went into lockdown. They were trying to control a spike in COVID-19 cases. And if you look at the chart of cases, it seemed to work.
And then they opened it back up.
Despite having the same lockdown measures, infections in Kent, an area outside of London, were still rising.
Oh, damn.
In early December, the overall drop in cases led the country to relax restrictions anyway. And then this happened.
The variant, oh boy.
It wasn't until around this time that researchers realized that somewhere in Kent, the virus itself had changed. It was a new variant. It was more contagious, and it was spreading. By the time scientists gave it a name, it had spread to most of southeast England. 2 months later, it was in 30 other countries. 5 months
Probably
later,
more.
it was the most common form of the virus found in the United States.
Yikes.
Lately, more and more variants are emerging in various places around the world. So, why are they showing up now? And what does this mean for the pandemic?
You know, it's actually kind of coincidental that I'm watching the show Loki, which talks about variants all the time, and we are simultaneously having talk about these COVID-19 variants.
Viruses are very simple. They're basically just the shell of proteins surrounding some genetic material, either DNA or RNA. That genetic material is made up of molecules that can be represented as a series of letters, like this.
It's been a long time since
Each part of this code contains instructions for how to make one specific protein that allows the virus to function. A virus has one goal, to make more of itself. But because it's so simple, it can't do that on its own. So it uses you. Every time a virus infects a person, it uses their cells to make copies of itself, replicating this complex code again and again and again. But eventually, it makes a mistake. Sometimes it deletes or adds a letter, sometimes it flips them around. That mistake is called a mutation, and it slightly changes the instructions for making the virus. That slightly altered virus is a variant. Since viruses are constantly going through this copying process, it's normal for them to change over time. For example, this chart shows some of the mutations the SARS-CoV-2 virus has made since December of 2019. Most of the time, these mutations are harmless, or even make the virus weaker, and they quietly disappear without making any notable difference. But other times, a series of mutations occur that give the virus a slight edge over us, which is what scientists started to notice with SARS-CoV-2 back in September of 2020.
You're seeing specific mutations that do allow the virus to bind human receptors better and enter cells better.
Coronaviruses are covered in spike proteins that they use to bind with and infect human cells. The thing is, that binding isn't a perfect fit, so it doesn't always get past the cell's defenses. But the B.1.1.7 variant, which scientists later renamed the alpha variant, has multiple mutations on the spike protein. Mutations that make it easier for the virus to bind with cells, which can help make the virus more transmissible, which led it to become a dominant strain in many places around the world. But if SARS-CoV-2 has been mutating all along, why do the variants today, like this alpha variant, suddenly seem so much worse?
I get the
It's
chart now.
important to remember that a virus doesn't make active decisions. It's not as if it creates a strategy within your cells. Mutations are random errors.
Right. It's just that it happens. These cells there's so many of them that it makes every choice essentially.
But the longer a virus is around and the more people it infects, the more it will change. And the more those changes accumulate, the more chances the virus has to evolve into something more dangerous.
That avoids the
These
vaccine.
4 variants, considered variants of concern by the World Health Organization, all have mutations on the spike protein. Delta, the most recent addition to this list, has been referred to as a double mutant, because while it has many different mutations, it has 2 significant ones we've seen before. This mutation seems to make the virus more transmissible. And a version of this one, found in 2 other variants, makes it easier for the virus to reinfect people who have already had COVID-19.
Jeez.
Meaning these 2 mutations may have evolved to dodge our natural immune response.
And it's not doing so strategically. It's just doing so through the natural order of things, through so many millions of times that it copies itself. Yeah, this is why it's so important for us to get vaccinated, because the longer we wait, the more mutations take place. And the focus shouldn't just be on, let's vaccinate everybody in the United States. It should be, we need to vaccinate the whole entire world, because if COVID is allowed to go rampant in other countries, the virus could mutate and we could be dealing with another super spreader that is immune to the vaccines that we've already developed. And we'd have to start the whole process over again. And yeah, that is not something any of us want.
Fortunately, the immune response we get from vaccines is much stronger than our body's natural immune response. So while we may see variants that make our vaccines somewhat less effective,
they're still
most
effective
experts
right now.
think it's unlikely one will emerge that completely evades our vaccines. But that doesn't mean it can't happen.
If you give the virus enough time and replicative cycles, it will sample a very large evolutionary space and find a solution to the problem we've presented it, which is vaccination and widespread immunity.
But even if SARS-CoV-2 doesn't get to that point, as long as the pandemic continues, and as long as the virus continues to spread, it will continue to make copies of itself. So, if we want to stop the variants, we need to stop the virus. The virus has evolved, but it hasn't morphed into something unrecognizable. The vaccines we have still protect against all the variants. The trouble is, we aren't getting those vaccines around the world fast enough, which is only giving the virus more time to change and ravage areas of the world that are still waiting.
Yeah, I've heard early on the estimates were that there's some countries in Africa wouldn't get them until 2024, which is 3 years from this recording. And that's just so ridiculous. My view all along is that you need to target the areas that have been hardest hit, which unfortunately was the United States. But then once we reached a certain level, there were other places that were being hit much harder, and yet we were still hoarding a lot of vaccine. Thankfully, Biden finally released more vaccine, or is shipping more vaccines to other areas that are being particularly hit hard recently. And even within the United States, there are communities that are hardest hit who didn't get access to the vaccine. Black and Latino neighborhoods, it was ravaging their community, but most communities that had access to it were richer, more whiter neighborhoods, actually. So that's disappointing as well. And yeah, so for instance, Governor Cuomo, governor of New York State, he's opening back up New York State completely, which is just ridiculous. No restrictions whatsoever. And yet, some communities have been vaccinated 80%. I think the financial district has 100% fully vaccinated, as in both 2 shots. Herd immunity has worked within those communities, but obviously we travel a lot between neighborhoods, and there are some Black communities that have 32% full vaccination, which this is not the time to open it back up if there are some neighborhoods like that, because they're just going to spread and it's going to be a huge problem. I started going back to the gym in May after I got fully vaccinated and had waited another 2 weeks. And they were still wearing masks. Everybody was wearing masks. They were social distancing. And all of a sudden, I went back to the gym 2 weeks ago and nobody was wearing masks anymore. And I'm just, even if they're fully vaccinated, we're supposed to trust the people who aren't vaccinated to not to like wear their masks, and like there's no proof that there aren't people with active COVID just walking around in there without a vaccine. Like it's really frustrating. And even though I feel somewhat safe knowing that I've had the vaccine and I am unlikely to get COVID, there's still a chance. And I'm also unlikely to get a serious case of COVID because of the vaccine, even if I do get it. But there's still always a chance. And while I'm not necessarily that afraid for my own personal health, I'm just like, this is a health catastrophe waiting to happen. And it's frustrating. Anyway, share people who have, yeah, okay, let's get back to this.
The rise of variants is a reminder that the pandemic isn't over, even if it feels like it is to some of us.
We need to stop this because we don't want a variant that affects immunity. And so that involves stopping replication everywhere.
So yeah, when we focused on the United States, we were having the biggest COVID outbreak back when the vaccines started to roll out. And I was like, yeah, we kind of need them. And so if another country needed them more, absolutely, I would have been supportive of delaying our vaccines so that they could get them. But now that we're at a place where we have excess vaccines, it's time to focus on. It was time to focus on other countries a long time ago, actually. And we're not. The United States is so frustrating because there are enough people that will just never get the vaccine because of this vaccine conspiracy. Oh my god. So I mean, we have idiots here who are wearing masks to guard themselves from people who have taken the vaccine. They think that people who have taken the vaccine will somehow be contagious some other way. People are going into, they're testifying that vaccines have made them magnetic when it's just like, things stick to you. Like if just, you can see how frustrated I am by all this. I really hope that people understand the danger we're still in, even though it feels like everything's back to normal. Hopefully this video taught you something. Hopefully it convinced you to get the vaccine if you haven't already, or maybe gives you information that you can tell to your friends and family who are vaccine hesitant. So yeah, thanks for watching, guys. Leave a like, really helps with the channel. And yeah, I'll see you guys next week with more. Bye, friends.